This podcast is a production of Unfiltered Studios. If you would like to know more about joining Unfiltered Studios, please visit our website at unfpod.com for more information.
And now, here's a word from our sponsor.
Spartacus Coffee is made for and made by hustlers, entrepreneurs, peak athletes, self-starters, and free thinkers. Our community of coffee drinkers believe in lifting each other up to be the best version of ourselves we can be. On top of that, every sale goes to the nonprofit organization No Kid Hungry, a national effort to end childhood hunger in America. To learn more about that and order some of the best, richest coffee you can find at an affordable price, go to spartacuscoffee.com and be sure to use my promo code. It's pretty simple. It's JBurke, which is JAYBURKE, and get 10% off your first order. Remember, Spartacus Coffee. We fuel the grind, we fuel the success, we fuel champions. We are Spartacus.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
In this episode, I sit down with Carolina Risotto, which, if you listen to this clip, you can tell I had some trouble pronouncing. Today, I get to welcome Carolina. How do you say it? You like Carolina Risotto? Is that how you say it? I'm trying to say it with the risotto. Like you have a little...
Carolina Risotto is in Portuguese, but you can just say Carolina Risotto. It's fine.
Okay. All right. I heard you say it, and I was like, I'm going to practice doing that. But then when it comes to it, I'm going to mess it up. I don't know what to tell you. I'm not perfect, guys.
It was perfect, but no, you just had to blow it up. You and your pride and your ego.
But I am a perfectionist, so go figure. Carolina is a jack of all trades in the world of content creation. But in her heart of hearts is a storyteller shaped by a life lived across continents. From navigating work-life balance in the US, Brazil, and France to personal growth sparked by stepping into the unknown of going to new places and living among strangers. In our discussion, we explore how cultural experiences redefine who we are. Carolina shares how travel challenges assumptions, fuels humility, and forces self-discovery, while we also dive into critical reflections on the American work culture, systemic pressures, and what it means to pursue passion and creativity. It's a conversation about finding meaning in the chaos and bridging divides through respect, communication, and a willingness to see the world through a different lens. First off, I need to apologize to Carolina because this was recorded around March, I think, maybe April. So I got really focused into stuff that was going on in the present with just the election and other things happening in America and, just my own life. So it was nice to go back to this one and really sit down and listen to it with some perspective of what's going on in the world and in this country, because I'm a big fan of Carolina and her podcast, No Ducks Given, and just her content. So I was just happy to sit down. But now more than ever, it feels like we need to find a way to understand each other. And that was one of the great things about going back and listening to this with a little more perspective. So it was a lot of fun and a really good discussion. But find out for yourself in an episode I'm calling Redefining Balance, a global perspective on work, life, and finding your path. It won't always be a straight line.
It won't always be a straight line.
It won't always be a straight line.
But take the journey.
Take the journey.
Take the journey.
Escape a while for thoughtful excursions
into the world of ideas across media,
politics, technology,
pop culture,
and all realms of civic life. Take the journey.
Take the journey.
Take the journey.
Take the journey. Take the journey.
Take the journey.
You're listening to The With J. Burke Show. Hello and welcome to The With J. Burke Show. My name is Jason Burke, and though I'm technically the host of this podcast, it's the guests who truly take top billing. This is a place for curious minds who enjoy civil and sometimes meandering conversation. If you appreciate a few laughs and want to come away with new knowledge about subjects that aren't always easy to break down, then you're the person I want listening to this podcast. Today, I'd like to welcome Carolina Risotto, a dynamic Brazilian and Latvian content creator based out of New York City. With her experience spanning roles as director, videographer, video editor, producer, and photographer, Carolina brings invaluable insights to every project. She also hosts the No Ducks Given podcast. It's a podcast that offers fresh perspectives on living abroad, networking, mental health, relationships, and just overall encourages listeners to embrace vulnerability and life's highs and lows in a fun and engaging way. Carolina, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Great introduction.
Thank you. I only had a little hiccup there, so we'll see what happens. We'll see if I can just edit it out, or do I have to re-record this whole thing? We'll find out. So I really appreciate it. I know this was hard to get together because you are currently anywhere in the world. You know, you've been all over the last few months, which is really, really cool. Which is one of the, besides being a fan, just one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, because this show is, a lot of it's about perspective. So getting that perspective of someone who's seen a lot of different parts of the world and engaged with many different people, that's something I think that would be valuable to my audience. So again, I appreciate it. And where are you currently?
So thanks for the kind words. I am currently based in Paris. I'm going to be here at least until September. I'm kind of just moving around, whatever feels good. I was living in the US for almost 9 years, I think. I'm born and raised in Brazil. And so after that experience in the US, I decided to travel last year and see a little bit more of the world. I also feel like the US has very much a work-centered culture, which after a while was becoming a little self-harming. Like I wasn't able to find balance. It's one of the reasons I decided to leave New York, so I could learn from other cultures about different ways of living. So I've been traveling for the past 7 months, recording a mini series for my YouTube channel called DNA, where I travel to all the countries my ancestors are from. And so at the end of the day, throughout the journey, I decided to move to Paris. So that's how I ended up here. I was like curious to get to know this culture this time.
Yeah, we're definitely a work-centric lifestyle here. It's just inbred in us from the time we're younger, and it does get tiring. Even doing, pet projects like this. Like this is just like a side thing. This is more for me why I do this podcast. Like it's just my escape. I love doing it. It's just a passion project, but it's like the first question everybody asks, it's like, are you making money now? Like, what are you doing with that? Like, and I'm like, please don't ruin this. Like it's like, I don't need to, focus on that. My focus is just to do something I enjoy and just create content that I would want to listen to and talk to people like you, talk to people who I would love to talk to. So people make it hard here for sure.
I understand. Yeah. I moved to the US because I wanted to become a workaholic. Like I always wanted to work, and Brazil, like I grew up in Rio, near the beach. So it's a very relaxed lifestyle. People definitely know how to have fun. And there are absolutely hardworking people there. But I knew that the US excels at that, entrepreneurship and everything. So yeah, but I think that's the thing. Another beautiful part about the US is exactly that. It's like, yeah, we can have our full-time job, whatever that is, but we're still pursuing other side things. So like your podcast and stuff, I think that's super cool, and yeah, you should do it because you're passionate about it. If money comes, that's even better. But like, that's the number one reason that I think you're actually able to go through like over 50 episodes. I mean,
yeah,
that's commitment.
Yeah, I've gotten lucky. It's something too. When I read the stats, how many people get to 50? It's only like 11% of podcasts that get to 50 episodes. And I was like,
I'm not at 50 yet either. So I'm still making my way.
it's definitely been a learning experience. I leave the first couple up, but if I ever go back or I ever see anybody's listening to it, I'm like, oh, what are you doing? You're never going to listen to me ever again. But it's good to have it up there.
Yeah.
It's good to have there just to see where you came from. So I think you were in Germany for a little bit, right? Have you found one of these cultures, at least in the European sense? Because the idea I always get is Europe is at least Western Europe, I guess we're talking about, is a little more. They definitely have their work culture, but they also have their life culture, like after work, outside of it. Do you find that there's a fine balance there, or is there a culture you found like a perfect balance?
I think whatever's a perfect balance is really subjective. We all want to work a certain amount of hours per week. Like I sometimes like sacrificing my weekends to just watch documentaries and stuff that I find interesting, which I know will be good for my craft, instead of going out or whatever. But one thing I've noticed here in France is like the eating ritual is definitely like a big thing, and 2-hour lunch breaks are completely normal. The work week here is 35 hours legally instead of 40. So that says a lot. So I would say France is definitely a really good representation of that work-life balance. But I know Germany is another country that protects, people's rights very heavily. Maybe England is the most workaholic country from my perspective so far. But that's the thing. It's like people do work hard, but they take breaks. But something that surprised me this weekend, I was talking to a friend of mine who I recently found out is my cousin. Crazy. Yeah, so it's a newfound cousin in France, like super random. But he's also born and raised in Brazil, and he's been in France for like 5 years. He works for L'Oreal as well, because I have a lot of friends here that work for L'Oreal. Apparently it's a thing. And he was saying that in Europe, in France, because like people are not used to working as much as, let's say, Americans, they burn out a lot more quickly, and they take it very seriously when you burn out. They're like, okay, you're going to take like 2 weeks off or whatever, like paid leave. So that was also interesting to me. Like people's level of how quickly they burn out is different. And living in the US, I definitely learned how to work while burned out and like extend my capabilities. So that was an interesting observation. But work-life balance is a pretty interesting thing. I'm just still learning how to do that.
Yeah, well, it's a little different too, because a lot of your work is your passion, right? So you do, and you're like multifaceted too in it. So it's like, in some ways, you probably get a push from doing something different within your field. You know what I mean? Like you get a little rush and you get a little more energy, as opposed to somebody who's maybe in a like a 9 to 5 that they're getting by and that's what they do, and it's harder to drive the passion up for that.
Yeah, I don't know what that world is like. The only time I sort of had a 9 to 5 was about 7 years ago, and I was kind of miserable in the sense that I don't work well with fixed schedules. I am incredibly disciplined, and I don't need people to tell me to work. I always will overwork myself, but it just kind of killed my creativity. It just wasn't the right fit for me, I think. But I kind of wish it was, because my life would be a lot simpler if that were the case. But I kind of accept who I am for what it is, and to be like, okay, my life is chaos. We're gonna go with that.
Yeah, well, some people need the chaos, right? It's like that's the driver, I guess. But people are chaotic in other ways outside of work. So
True.
I've noticed that there's some people I worked with where I'm like, oh, these guys got it together, and then you find out their personal life is just like,
Huh,
a
that's
little
an
different.
interesting observation. I never thought of that. My personal life is pretty chill in comparison. Like, it's just pretty stable. Like, friends, family.
There's a lot of people I find, at least in this culture, maybe too, just because the way it's taught, that they can control their work aspect. It's like they have control over that life and they exert the control there, whereas the outside life may be just chaotic and not necessarily control all the elements that happen outside of that. Just an observation I picked up. Not everybody, but I've seen it.
I mean, you're the American. You know better than me for sure.
Well, I also wonder about my view of it. So I'm in the Northeast. I'm about a stone throw from New York City. I'm in New Jersey, but I'm right next to the bridge and I can get there in about 15 minutes. I always wondered though, I always hear California is more laid back, but it's still, there's American cities there and there's a lot of work there, but I hear it's much more laid back than us. And then you can go to like the rural areas. I mean, America's just like a huge place. So That's sometimes some of the thing too. It's just like, well, we have a work culture, but I don't know what that means in different areas of the country.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I've lived like when I was a kid, when I was 9 years old, I lived for 1 year in Edina, Minnesota. Pretty random.
That is random.
But yeah, my mom is she works in law in Brazil, and she was like a visiting scholar at the University of Minnesota. So she took like the whole family. That's how I learned English. But I don't know. I think even if it's not like a work-centered state in the US, I think just the fact that there's not of like a civil rights for workers
Mm.
says a lot about the kind of culture of like it's normal for you to work this much and not have rights and not have vacation days. So I would say that probably reflects a lot on the work culture in those states if it's not by working, I don't know, 50 to 60 hours a week. But as far as I can tell, there are consultants all over the US, and one of my best friends is a consultant and she suffers. She's
Yeah.
working till like midnight, 1 a.m. So wherever there's a consulting business, there's someone overworking themselves.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of like right to work states, which gets a little weird too, because it's like, I'm not going to pretend I know all the legalese about all this stuff, especially since I haven't looked it up in a while. But, it's like employers can basically, like in my state, you would think we would be considered more progressive, but you could still get fired for like any reason. You could still be forced to work, 60 hours, and depending on what the job is, it's yeah, it's just something in the fabric here. It's a generational thing. I do see the generations kind of fighting back against that, though, the younger ones, especially because it's kind of like screwy here, right? So like you have the older generation is like, well, I mean, I had a house, I had a college education, I worked for, and it's like, well, it was kind of easy though to do that back then. I mean, it was a different system. I mean, you could work a regular job and still buy a house and to a car and pay for college and stuff like that. So I see a lot of the younger generation kind of fighting back because nobody could buy houses. Everybody's got college debt saddled to them and all kinds of things. So it's interesting. I'm interested to see where it's taken to next. Like what happens after this generation gets some kind of power.
Yeah, I would hope it gets better. I was watching a TED Talk about that actually last week. It's just crazy, the prices and the salaries, they just don't make sense.
No, nothing makes sense now, as far as just the way everything has become. It's so hard. Like I make more money than I thought I would, and I have like no money. You know what I mean? Like it's gone between house and just other priorities. It's like it's difficult, for middle class people as far as just trying to get ahead. You could really get ahead. It's one of those things too in this country. So we don't have a lot of safety nets. We have a little bit, but compared to Germany or even the UK, who I think is kind of like a mini America in some way, but they have at least some kind of safety net for their people. I mean, they have healthcare for their people. We don't have that. But like, I don't remember where I was going with this. I'm sorry. But
No, that's
anyway,
fine.
yeah. I'm saying is we
I
don't
think
have
it's
any of that stuff.
interesting.
Yeah.
One perception I can say that people in Europe have of the US
Mhm.
is that like I was mentioning how the salaries in the US are much higher, especially in New York and LA, which is the main references I'm going to use since it's the places I lived. But I would be like, yeah, like the salaries in New York are much higher, so I'm still trying to figure out what would be the equivalent in Paris. And they're like, "Oh, yeah, like but in New York like they make so much money and so they can actually afford the expensive lifestyle there. So like it doesn't really matter." I was like, "No, actually the salary that people make in New York doesn't really correspond with the expenses that they have. It's not like they're balling, like at all."
Yeah.
So, but people think that in New York, oh, they make higher salaries, which allows them to afford the lifestyle. They don't understand that it's not a thing. It's like still the minority that's able to live like an appropriate lifestyle in a place like New York.
Right. Well, they see the people in the penthouses, and those are very, very special, select few people who live like that. But
Yeah.
they make it look like New York is like that, but it's mostly people commuting in, or especially in Manhattan, it's mostly commuters, and everybody moved out where I am, I mean, there's a lot of people here, and most of it's because of the commuting to New York, or they came from another part of New York that's not necessarily Manhattan. They came from the Bronx, or they came from, well, Brooklyn's like crazy now. Were you in Brooklyn? Did I remember that
No,
right?
I was living in Manhattan. I've spent a lot of time in Brooklyn,
Okay.
but I was like on the Upper West Side, like right at the end of the Upper West Side. But I found a great deal. That was a great apartment. Like,
Yeah.
my roommate still lives there. It was just like a miracle. But Brooklyn is in many ways more expensive than some parts of Manhattan. Like the Upper West Side, I think there's still some prejudice from young people. They're like, it's so far, and I'm like, is Brooklyn close? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But when the prices of like Bushwick start becoming the same as Upper Manhattan, I'm like, I'm gonna live in Upper Manhattan because with global warming, especially, like there was a time that I was just visiting New York in 2021. I wasn't living there yet, and there was like a massive flood. Like it was raining so much, and all the trains were not working. And I needed to get to Queens, which is where I was staying, and I couldn't get to Queens, and it was like a 2 hour walk. And I was like, well, if I lived in Manhattan, I would make it there by foot. Like I could have walked there, but I can't. So I only got home, I think, at like 3 a.m. I was stuck from 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. waiting to get back to Queens. It was crazy. I had to walk in the rain in the middle of the night. Like it was like a wild night, honestly. So that was like the key decision maker for me of like, well, Manhattan is usually where I'll be for work or whatever. I'm going to get a place in Manhattan. If something happens, I can bike or I can walk home.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's funny. My whole family is from Brooklyn, mostly. My parents were, and then the rest of the family. But it's funny. They were like, where they lived, it was like projects at the time, so it was low income. And now it's like, it's so ritzy over there. It's just a different world. But, anyway, you know what? I wanted to get back to your traveling a little bit, as far as what, obviously you've seen different cultures, you've seen this, seen that, and seen whatever you've seen, but how do you feel like that's helped you, like as far as growing on an individual basis?
Oh my God, too much. It's crazy, because I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that it's easy breezy. It's really not. I have to admit, like wanting to grow as a person is really difficult. Like it requires you admitting your flaws and seeing things from a different perspective, accepting that you're not really going to understand everything right away. So I think for me, like the past few years have been very transformational, and traveling was very humbling because I arrived at every single culture knowing that it's their home, not mine. How do things work? Like, what are the basic words that I need to know to get around? What's disrespectful? What isn't? So I think it kind of takes you to like a point zero almost when you're reaching a new culture, a new country, and trying to understand these basic things, because they're things that are almost intuitive in your day to day when you're living in the same place for the longest time. And then suddenly it's so counterintuitive, like when I first moved to France, my first day here, I apparently was rude to two people, both in public transportation. And I wasn't feeling super confident speaking French yet. I'm only now actually starting to feel good about it. But I remember that like it was an evening and I was gonna take a bus, and I hopped on the bus and I said, "Good evening," but I said it kind of low because I was like insecure. And the woman just flipped out on me because I asked a question right after. And she was like, we say good evening around here. I was like, I'm sorry, I think I said it. She's like, no, like you didn't say it, like it doesn't matter where you're from and blah blah blah. She was like so mad because I didn't say good evening. And here it's a thing. You gotta say good morning, good evening, excuse me to everyone at all times. Even if you like accidentally get in their way, it's like you say pardon, you say I'm sorry. Like people will correct you for it. And it's the cultural thing. And if you just do that, then the world is open. People are nice, they're sweet, but it's like a small detail that in some places in the US, like that wouldn't be a thing, especially New York,
Yeah.
people are just like,
Yeah, New
whatever, like
York.
fuck you, like
Yeah. Yeah, like I gotta get to my destination and you were in the way, so it's not my fault. Yeah, it's kind of like
yeah. I
just
mean,
push it out of the way.
I've gotten into like screaming matches with strangers in New York, like for when they're just complaining about the stupidest things sometimes out there. But
Well, that's true. That's like their rite of passage. It's like to complain about everything. Yeah,
for
I could.
sure. So I feel like it's a rite of passage to become a New Yorker as well. It's like when you're yelling at people on the street, like you're stopping to give a shit. Like, yeah, and that's you becoming a New Yorker. So it's a part of who I am, for sure. But it's dying down out here. I feel like I was becoming a little too impatient when I was living in New York, and I didn't like that about myself. Really didn't. I don't want to just want to intuitively tell someone to fuck off, you know? It's just it's not the greatest thing.
I know. Could I tell you? So I worked in my early 20s in Manhattan for a couple of years. I couldn't stand it. A couple of years. I'm just not that fast of a person. I like to like look, I like to smell the flowers and take in the scenery. You can't do that there, like you were saying. It's not like that. But I remember like I started working back in Jersey again. Like I'm driving around and I'm like in Jersey, I'm cutting people off. You know what I mean? Like I noticed a difference in the way I drove, and I'd be like, this guy's not moving fast enough at the light. I'm honking at. I'm like, I'm not even giving him a second to, take his foot off the brake. And I'm like, God, I'm the asshole. Like I became such an asshole just from my experience for 2 years being there. And you're right. I could totally see that. I do also wonder, though, it's got to be a lot when it's not your natural language. So you're constantly thinking about what you're saying and how to say it and how it's going to come off. I mean, that's got to affect a lot of things too.
Yeah, I think it was the hardest part of adapting here. And I'm still working through it, you know. There's so much that I don't know yet, like in terms of vocabulary. Uh God, it's like a pain, you know. Get a little social anxiety still. But I would say it's just like yeah, like you're constantly translating things in your head, and the first month was the hardest because I had to learn everything, like food, supermarket, I don't know, like people's accents. You just feel like you're stupid, you know? That's how it feels like, which
It's
is
humbling.
it's very humbling. I think it's important, you know, for people to kind of like humiliate themselves a little bit in that sense. It's like yeah, like it's not easy, you know? Like I was even annoyed a little bit today. Like I was at visiting a friend at a coffee shop, and there was this table, whatever, that was free that next to this couple, and I asked them like, "Hey, excuse me, like, is this table free?" And they just reply. I asked them in French, and they just replied to me in English because they were American. No offense, but they were just a little bit dismissive with the way they were saying it. Like, yeah, it's free. Like, you're assuming that I speak English. Like, you know, you're in France. Like, so I was like, oh my, the French in me, like it's becoming a thing. But I understood that for a second because people, they're so polite when they ask for things here that you want that extra politeness. Like, I want it now. Like, I really like it instead of like, yeah, yeah, whatever. Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, don't say whatever. Like, make me feel special. Like, but that's also very Brazilian of me because Brazilians, like, we're very, very warm and friendly, and we're extra careful about everything we say to anybody. It's like, of course, my friend, like everybody's your friend. You know, the cab driver is your boss. Like the waiter is, hey boss. Like everyone is just so extra sweet. So maybe blame that on me, on my Brazilian side. I get a little too sensitive sometimes.
That's okay.
But I was yeah, but I was like, well, I wish she had been nicer. I wish she had said, of course. Like, I don't know. That's just silly, you know. But that's the thing. That's why I don't even know who I am anymore. Like, I'm just like a blend of, I think, everything I've experienced, and I'm kind of American. I'm very Brazilian in some ways. French. I've also dated a French guy for several years. So self-discovery, you know, it's a mess.
Yeah, well, that's a weird thing too, right? So like self-discovery is weird because you're constantly evolving too. And a lot of people don't, I don't think a lot of people take that into account. Like they'll be like, I need to find myself. And it's like, you're going to find yourself and then you're going to have to find yourself again because you're just constantly going to change, and it's moment to moment sometimes. But that's how I deal with it because it's like, I get trapped in my head too sometimes. I'm like, who am I? Like, what is it that what do I want? What do I need? And then I realize I'm like, that could depend on, how much sleep I got last night. I might have different needs that day. Or I woke up and I stubbed my toe and now my day is all off. So
Yeah.
I don't know. This self-discovery is a strange thing, but it's also a beautiful thing, I guess, too.
Yeah, that's why I usually think the first impression of who we are is the most honest because what I wanted as a kid, I think, even though I didn't really understand what it was, I think still remains what I want. And even though I've been through this entire path of learning how to produce, film, edit, blah, 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 work on commercials with YouTube, films, it still got me to the same place, which is I want to be on camera hosting. Because my first inspiration was Ryan Seacrest on American Idol.
Really?
It was him. And I don't really know why. I was like 10 years old. I was obsessed with American Idol. And I was just like, I want to be that guy. That's all I wanted. I didn't know I would be talking about vulnerability and self-discovery, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. The thing is, I'm not very interested in like gossip magazines or stuff like that. So I was like, well, I can't exactly be Ryan Seacrest. Like, though I do think he's really incredible at his job. So then a friend of mine like told me when I was like 18, he told me about something I said to him when I was 15. And I was like, what? I was like, he was saying that I inspired him to get out of his comfort zone and that like that really changed him. And I was like, oh, really? Like I said that to you when I was 15? Like I didn't even remember. And it's just become a huge part of my brand. So I feel like it's always been who I am. And other people might have noticed it even before I did. So yeah, but it was like the most genuine thing. It's like, yeah, like you need to get out of your comfort zone. You need to try new things. And so I've always embraced that. It's my lifestyle. It's why I'm constantly uncomfortable, which my dad tells me I shouldn't. But that's the life I chose, and I try to live by example and kind of share that experience. But ultimately, that dream, from when I was a kid, it's the most honest version of myself, and I try to honor that. But that's at least my experience.
That's so interesting, though, that you got that from Ryan Seacrest.
Yeah, I know, right? It's probably his hair too.
I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to tell you something now I haven't said on this podcast. There was a few years with American Idol, accidentally or not, my hair was just like Ryan Seacrest. Like every year, like it would come on and they'd be like, I swear to God, I'm not copying. Like,
oh, it's just like the Justin Bieber phase. All these guys with the Bieber haircut, they're like, I'm not copying him.
Yeah, I had like the little when he used to like frost it and stuff. I even had like that thing going for a while. But like it would be funny. Like American Idol would come back and it'd be like, I swear he's mimicking me. It's not the other way around. But
it's nice hair. It's not a bad thing.
No, I know. Please, I can't lose this. This is like, I don't have a good shaped head, so I always say like if it's going, that's the one thing I'm going to be vain about is like I'm going to do everything I can to save this thing I got. But anyway,
this full head of hair.
I know it's like a signature at this point. I can't just get rid of it. I can't just lose it. It can't be that uncomfortable. Uncomfortability is good, but that would be too much for me. No, I think that you but you kind of hit it on the head, right? So it's like you're living your life though the way you want. Like whether it's I don't know Ryan Seacrest, I would say Ryan Seacrest is the catalyst, but like what he did, you wanted to do, but you're doing it in your own way. Like you took your own way about it.
For sure.
It's like, and I'm saying like, so this podcast, there's so many things that inspired me, but one of the things that inspired me, I did go to school to be in journalism. I never did it. Like I wanted to be like one of those crazy journalists that was all over the place, but I never did it. So this is like one of my ways I do it, talking to people from all over the place and just getting to learn things and stuff like that. But Yeah, I think I love what you do. So I just need to say that. Like I love your show, your podcast. Because I think that's the tone of it though. It's like they're real genuine conversations. There are different topics, but they're always genuine. They're very to the heart of the matter.
Thank you. I'm really glad that I'm inspiring someone. That's definitely the goal. Yeah, I try to keep it diverse. I would say I'm really good at like asking questions and trying to understand things. I'm not necessarily a specialist at anything. Though I would say, actually, no, I'm kind of a specialist at getting out of my comfort zone. But in terms of topics, I think I have my curiosity comes from the right place. That it allows me to ask the questions that will bridge the gap between understanding and not understanding. So that's what I try to do. And I really try to go to things without a judgmental point of view because I feel like when you judge people, you lose an opportunity to meet them. And I am the optimistic person who believes that people come into this earth looking to be happy and achieve great things. And sometimes they get a little lost in their way to do that and hurt people, which is why when I see haters online, I'm like, these people are going through something, and I've actually made a few videos to address that, which are going to be on my Instagram page because I think the hate on social media is like completely out of control right now. It's just like what is happening. So yeah, I don't know. I try to post as much as I can, but I like you, I kind of just do it for myself ultimately, and I hope that people tune in, and it's sort of like, well, if anybody needs the help, here's what I've got, and that's sort of it. But the second season of the podcast is a lot more about questioning myself and being like, I don't know everything that's going on, and being willing to change my mind at all times. People always like call other people out for like, oh, but you said this before. Like, well, whatever. I'm allowed to change my mind. Like, I
Mhm.
can't. Why is it that it's offensive to change your mind? Like,
Yeah, no, I agree with that 1,000%. So I've always kind of been that way. I love perspective. Um, I know what I'm good at. I've gotten to I've gotten to a point where I enjoy what my mind is, and it's like just always trying to fix puzzles in my head. I'm always trying to take a 10,000 yard view from above of everything going on and put like puzzle pieces together. It could drive you insane if you let it, but I've learned to accept it. And that's like one of the things I try to do here is just I'm not trying to force somebody to think the way I think. What I'm trying to do is just offer perspective, and then you make the decision of what you think yourself. But I was just on somebody's podcast talking about this. Like, I'm not concrete. I'm not black and white. I'm always in the gray, probably too much in the gray. I'm always looking at those shades. But I think, like, at the end of the day, if I broke down what the podcast probably is, it's just I mean, it sounds silly. It's like to inspire people just to think in a different way. That's all I want. I don't want to change anybody's mind. I don't want to uh, be any kind of influencer. I think that that's lacking in this world. And when you talk about online, I see that especially. It's just like groupthink takes over. Everybody just jumps on and the bandwagon. And you're right too about changing your mind. Like changing your mind's fine. That's growth.
yeah, yeah, people are just, I would say that when they're attacking others or when they're not willing to change their mind, they're ultimately just insecure. I think ultimate confidence is
Hmm.
being able to admit you're wrong and change your life path completely. Like, that's real confidence, and just be like, yeah, I'll figure it out because you have no other choice. You have to figure it out. So would you rather avoid the problem or face it head on? Like, I prefer facing it, which is probably why my life's so complicated. I don't really delay anything. It's like, it's gonna be painful. Let's just get it over with. Let's just do
Yeah.
it. So,
No, but you're gonna have to face something, right? So that's why you are where you are, though. That's why you're able to say, I've been, all over the world and done all this and done all that, as you probably faced a lot of things you needed to face to get out there.
yeah, but what's weird though is that the more things I see, the more ignorant I feel. There's just so much we don't understand,
Yeah.
you know? So, yeah,
Well,
I,
that's
I
why.
don't even know. I feel like I can't just live one place. I have to go see that thing. Like there's a lot I haven't seen. But then that's the anxiety in me, you know.
But that's why, travel is so important. Meeting other people is important. It's so important because that's where you realize you know nothing. And that's okay. Like, you don't know anything. You could be the smartest guy in the world. Doesn't mean you know anything. So I think what you're doing is great. I wish, at least in this country, I wish people travel more. And that's usually a lot of the problems with the differences we have in this country is people aren't talking to, or they talk to like-minded people. What you're talking, like kind of what you were saying before. The only thing I could equate it to this once, and this is like what kind of made my perspective a little like, oh my God, people need to get out more. I had a friend who was in the Navy and he was stationed in Virginia. So I think it was Virginia Beach or whatever. And I went to go visit him, and he had a pal from the South, like one of the rural regions, maybe Alabama or Tennessee or something, but like really not a lot of people. He was the nicest guy. I had a great conversation with him, but at the end of this conversation, he was saying how when he was younger, if he saw me walking in his town, him and his friends would have jumped me because I was a Yankee. And I was like, you were going to curb stomp me because I just have my parents lived somewhere and had me,
That's crazy.
and he's like, well, now, yeah, that's how I thought. He said it was nothing, but like I always remembered that, and I was like I have to feel threatened walking into this place because I'm from a different area. And it's not my fault, but his perspective changed because he got outside of his comfort zone when he joined the military. And from that point on, I was like, yeah, that's kind of like one of the things that people need to do is get out of where they're from, or their comfort zone, and just meet different people because that opens things up.
How is the education system in the US in terms of teaching about world history or motivating people to go abroad? Like what is students' perspectives in school about going abroad? How is that?
I have a lot of problems with the US educational system, so I'm probably a tough one to ask, but I don't think they're teaching a lot of that stuff. I don't think they focus on that, at least in the lower levels. Maybe college is a little different and you can go kind of, you could take semesters abroad, and they do have some of that stuff sometimes. We still have like transfer student programs and things like that, but mostly it's like, I think school is kind of silly here. I don't know what it's like in other countries, but like I never understood. They're trying to teach kids how to recognize words in kindergarten, which is nice, or math equations and stuff. I always thought you have to the best thing you can learn in your youth is emotional intelligence anyway. Like I think emotional intelligence is so many people are stuck with not being able to process emotions. That's what kills a lot of people. But I don't see us ever pushing anything as far as trying to get outside of the country. And I don't see them push world history. I mean, we kind of teach, which is funny because so I'm a big history person. I love history because that's a web. Like I'm trying to put a web together, and that's usually how you see the whole picture. And US history is obviously fascinating because I lived through it, but the way we're taught, like the US Revolution here, you would think like Jesus came down and anointed it. And when I've looked abroad at what they think of that, and they're like, oh yeah, I mean, it's like we talk about it, but like the French Revolution is huge in Europe because that's what really, changed everything. The US Revolution, it's like we kind of teach it as like, yeah, it was a rebellion against England, and that's like one chapter. But here it's like we think like we created democracy. And I don't know, we're a weird country. Like we're too big.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like a part of the America's marketing campaign.
Yeah,
Make America seem the greatest nation. So they teach it in school as it's like we did all of these great things, and when everybody was like doing things that might have been bigger in comparison.
We have a lot of trouble with that here, we tend to take the Superman complex, like we wear the cape or something. And it depends on where you are. The education system's very different in different areas. I mean, where I live, the education I hate to say it's much better than in a lot of other areas. We're probably one of the better ones in the country. And there's a lot of people cursing at me right now. But I will say we graduate more scientists to those people. I think it was more scientists, more engineers, more whatever. Like we just have a better education system in Jersey and probably New York. But that also scares me because sometimes I see what some of the kids think, and I'm like, who taught you this? Like, where did you learn this? But no, we're not big. I don't know. I don't know what your experience in the education system was being in different countries and stuff as far as when you were younger. Obviously now you're not in the education system where you are, but
Well, I went to a private schools in Brazil. So Brazil, the public schools, they're really not great. Like we consider the public schools in the US amazing. A little of a perspective. But in Brazil, it's really not, because there's a lot of greve. I don't know the word in English, but it's when the teachers like stop working for better salaries. What is that?
oh, so they go on strike, like they're unionized and they
Strike.
go on strike. Okay.
Yes. You see, I'm starting to forget words that like the longer I'm here, but there's only so much space in the brain. But
I hear
I
you.
know that that was like an issue, and just like the quality of the education, of course. So you kind of have to go private. The private schools in Brazil, they're not nearly as expensive as in the US, by the way. So it's just kind of like middle class standard. Like you're going to go to a private school because that's better. So I went to private schools, and you learn everything, all the world history. I think probably what we least got into was Asia in terms of like old history, but more like towards the 1850s and on. I think we studied more of Asia and what was happening there. All the world wars were studied. The US history was all studied, the revolution and all that. So I would say it's pretty in-depth education when you go to the appropriate school. And then all the universities, like some of the best ones, are public, ironically. So no tuition. So there are some really good paid private universities as well. But then it's sort of like the same drama. Oh, it goes on strike, and then you can't really graduate. Like that's a huge drama for many of my friends. Like, oh yeah, I was supposed to graduate like 3 years ago, but this year I think we're gonna make it. Like, like what the hell? So but I would say from middle higher class, people are pretty well educated, but I can't say that for the most of Brazil necessarily. There's still a lot of inequality. It's a huge country, right? Geographically bigger than Europe itself. And so we have a lot of different issues, and a big part of the population can't even write. I know that I grew up with a maid, and I've talked about that in one of my episodes. But when I was like 16 on 10th grade, she was on third grade, and she's like 54. So that's
yeah.
crazy. It's crazy. But the maid is also something that's like normal in Brazil, as an example. It's also socially acceptable and accessible for middle class. But to me, that kind of discrepancy is just like weird. It's uncomfortable.
We're getting to that point though a little bit as far as haves and have-nots and stuff. So our school system, one of the things that is always interesting to me, I don't know how it worked in Brazil, but our schools, the amount of money they get is based on our property tax, really. So if you have a good zip code, you're going to get a good education because you're paying higher property taxes at that point. So usually what happens is lower income students don't get, or lower income areas don't have the type of schools, say I would have here in the suburbs, because everybody complains about it, but my property taxes pay for a lot of that education that's looked at as necessary for moving forward. And the same thing, like college is starting to get really weird as far as affordability. We changed a lot of things with college as far as making it, I guess everything's like a business here though. That's the problem with it. Everything becomes almost in some way privatized, even if it is through the government. There's always like private networks at work, and everything just becomes out of touch for people. That's part of
It's
that
really
work life.
insane.
Yeah. The college thing is always very sad to me because education and experience together are like almost an unstoppable force to me if you can marry the two. But we tend to neglect, I don't want to say we neglect that here, but like for instance, what we do is we brain drain the rest of the countries. But that also says like we need to make it affordable for people. To me, that says like there's a fundamental flaw in the system that says that we need to find ways to give our citizens the a way to get that education.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you start normalizing things, not having access to things that are supposed to be basic rights, when someone comes in there and tries to fix the problem, they're almost like a hero. When it's like, nah, it's the bare minimum. So for me, it's like the US breeds a culture of being in debt, and that's just ridiculous. Like it just makes no sense. Everyone's in debt. Like they want you to be in debt, just like they want you to be sick and to take medications. There's just a lack of care for people, and with the food industry too. Like they want
Yeah,
you to be sick. They want
I
you to
always
get
think that.
diabetes. What the hell? It's like almost 50% of the population is obese. This makes no sense. Like they're manipulating and using its people. So it's just like atrocious, to be honest. Like it just makes me very, very frustrated
Well,
to see that. And
we're a super consumerist. That's our thing. We're consumerists. So from the time you're a kid, that's all the advertisements are. Be a good citizen and consume. That's what you got to do. That's how you keep the economy going. It's always silly when I start to think about it. I'm like, it's really like a Ponzi scheme, this whole thing. Like just
you're right.
keep spending money to make, inflate the stock market because that's important to us too, which I always find funny because I'm like, that metric is stupid. Because, it's something like the top 20% own 80% of the stock market. The rest of it, if we're in the stock market, the lower percentage usually through like 401ks and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's just a dumb metric to me for a society that's doing well. But yeah, you're right. I always think about that. It's the food and then nobody eats right. But that's another thing where education would help. And I'm saying that for myself. It's so hard to figure out in our country what is good food. And then again, it's such a fast-paced society that says, overwork. And then it's, if you're working 12-hour days, you're usually going to grab Burger King on the way home or something. You're not cooking yourself a good meal and eating what you should. So
Yeah.
the system, I always look at everything. It's like, I think everybody wants to see a guy when they talk about getting screwed over, they're thinking of a guy twirling his mustache, like an evil guy with like a cigar twirling his mustache. But I think it's just a bunch of systems that are set up, they all, their main goal is to make money, is to make as much money at any way possible. And the people in those systems can avoid any kind of responsibility to it because they could say, well, like, for instance, my company is responsible to stockholders, not anybody else, not to myself, not to whatever. It's stockholders. So, meanwhile, if you're a food manufacturer, you're throwing shit in your food that's killing people. So, but you take yourself out of the equation by saying, like, well, I'm just part of this system and it's responsible to its stockholders.
Yeah, I mean it's easy to just follow the system and to question it, but the truth is that we're all brainwashed, like in some way, and we just don't know necessarily, and it's uncomfortable for people. They don't want to say, "Oh, I've been brainwashed," because then it's like, "No, wait, I'm not a fool. I'm not stupid. I wouldn't let that happen to me." But when you're raised in a society that's already brainwashed, you don't even see it happening. There are no signs to it. It's so which is why I think traveling is so important because it allows you to see things from a different perspective, how a different society works. And it allows you to identify these blind spots and see how people also see you from the outside. It's like, how do people perceive American culture? Like, what is glamorized? What is not? Like, what is criticized? So I think that's why it's important for people to travel. Like, otherwise, you only exist your own universe. Even if it's just in your country, like, that's already beneficial.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, and I know there's historians like recently who got together and they're trying to put together these programs for students that travel to other places to learn, because I think that's a way to help with the division in the country. Is if you can get other perspectives, it goes back to what I was talking about with that kid who they wanted to murder me, basically, or whatever they were going to do. If you see different perspectives, it changes your mind. It's the same thing. I always wonder, because Europe is so good at, well, at least in my opinion, from what I've seen, at least they understand there is an importance to work, but they do have a balance there as far as protecting their citizens from it, right? They have safety nets and stuff. I would also say historically, Europe's been through a lot more than America has and is a lot less insulated than America has. So, I read a book once about after World War II, which not a lot of people teach about or talk about. And, you had civilizations that were just 10 or 15 years before, like the height of Western civilization, but now they didn't even have a post office. There was no laws. There was nothing left after World War II in some of these areas. And it was chaos. And they had to figure out a system to get, number one, like the rule of law in place, and then protect their citizens as well. So I always think this is why they're probably open to a lot of this stuff. They're open to, universal health care, because they kind of had to do that after World War II. And they had to figure out ways to protect people. And where I come from, we didn't have that threat even in World War II. I know we had Pearl Harbor, but, we're an isolated country from all that. We're very protected by our borders. Our seas protect us from a lot. Now the nuclear age, who knows if that's true anymore, but we've never had to live the kind of life that they had to.
Yeah, that also brings me some perspective as well, and something I've been thinking about. I feel like people only unite really in times of hardship and difficulty. Yes. And it really shouldn't be that way. So it's it shouldn't take the US being bombed and needing to have universal health care for that to become available. Why does it take that much for countries to get things right? And even in personal relationships, why is it that you need to screw up to actually do the right thing? Why can't we just try to be good now? Why do we take everything for granted? Why is the human brain like that? There's just such a lack of gratitude, and I don't know where I saw it. I just consume so much content, but I saw it somewhere where they were saying that, I don't know, 100 years ago, hot water wasn't even accessible, to everybody, in the shower. So it's we have hot showers and we're just so spoiled, everything that we have. So that's why I get so mad. It's the lack of gratitude that we have for everything. And it sucks because it's not that I don't feel that. I also feel outraged because of the ways that I haven't shown gratitude all the time. I think I always bring it back to me. I always have to take responsibility for the things that I've done as much as I can. And so for me, I guess a big one is family, proximity to family. Brazil is a wonderful country in many ways, but it's also dangerous, Rio, you can't really comfortably talk to your, on your phone on the street or bring your camera out. You're always in danger of being robbed. It's just a part of the culture, unfortunately. And so that public safety and the lack of opportunity and lack of entrepreneurship, like it exists in the US, it's also what led me to leave. But it's also what made a big part of my family leave. My siblings live in the US. I have cousins all over the US and Europe. Everybody's spread out and I'm here alone in France. I lost completely my sense of family. I don't have that. I don't have a lot of friends. I spend 95% of my time alone, to experience this different culture and see what else is out there. So yeah, I took for granted having a family close by. So because I just had it and it was just normal to me to have it. So now that I don't have it, it's okay, how can I get that back? It sucks. It's difficult.
I do. I know exactly what you're saying. It's kind of but you said it even with dating or something, it's I've heard the complaint, No, he's completely different with his new girlfriend. And it's like, well, he learned, I guess, from the last one, right? Like, why couldn't he just do that then? Or why, or she, I don't want to just say he, but yeah, it's just the thing of, I agree with you. Gratitude is a very, very, I guess it's a lost art at this point. Because I do that to myself too. I'm like, I'll get upset about something and I'll be like, but I'm also very lucky that I've even had this. Like, now that I don't have it, like, shouldn't I have respected it when I had it? It's weird. It's just a weird thing, right? Like, even, hot water, like you said. But generations are different if you grow up with it. Even going back to that World War II thing I was talking about, I remember I was doing something for a podcast that I was doing, but I was reading one of the last survivors of World War II. And he said that he didn't like some of the things he saw, as far as he said he thought he saw a lot of authoritarians and like almost like fascism kind of rising into place again. And he goes, it comes down to that every generation loses it a little bit more, loses what the last generation had. So they don't know. He's like, I know what it was like growing up in that era. I know what ended up happening, but nobody else does. As the generations go on, you can tell them about it, but they haven't lived through it to understand it.
Yeah, we lose that perspective. We can read about it, but it's still like we're not experiencing it. We're not seeing it ourselves. So it's like it didn't happen.
Yeah, like I said, you could read about it, but it's like unless you experience it, it's not. Yeah, it just doesn't work its way in there. Or you don't
The
feel it.
Ukraine war, yeah, like no one's talking about it anymore. Like, yeah, it's still in the news sometimes in some portals, but it's not on social media. It's gone, disappeared. Oh well, we already talked about that. Like it was 2 years ago. Like,
I
oh, it's still
know,
happening.
I
Like,
know.
yeah, like where's all the support? Like it's gone. Like, so it's just people forget. They get lost in their realities, which is, I understand. Like we all, it's an individualistic society. Like we need to do things ourselves. No one's going to take care of us. But it just shows like that people just forget. And this is an active war that's happening right now. But if it were like in their city or in their hometown, they'd be like posting about it and be actively, a part of it. But no, if it's not happening to you, who cares? That's the problem. So, but again, like everyone has their own timing. I don't think people should talk about things if they don't feel ready. I don't think we all need to have an opinion on things all the time. I think there's a lot of pressure on social media of like,
Yeah,
oh, if something's happening, you have to talk about it. No, if I don't feel educated enough and I don't feel ready to talk about it, I'm not going to talk about it. I'd rather not say anything than give misinformation. So it's okay to not have an opinion, and it's okay to just observe and try to understand things. Like having an opinion doesn't make you cool if it's a stupid opinion, like just take a chill pill, like take a second, observe, ask questions, and let time give you the answers. At least that's how I think currently. That's what I'm doing right now. I try not to be too opinionated.
yeah. Well, that's where I come with the gray, because I don't know. So you had an episode about that, like questioning your own reality, but I think you took, is that a Plato or Socrates line? Or like, all I know is I know
Socrates.
nothing. That's Socrates, right? Yeah. All I know, and I love that, because I usually say something to that effect, is like, I know I don't know anything. I think everybody, I've said this before in other podcasts where we've gotten into some of these subjects, and I'm like, listen, I think everybody's a little right and very wrong. That's what I think, because your perspective is your perspective, and that's right. Some of that is right to you. It doesn't mean it's right for the other person. And I think that's like what all this is. It's right. Like we're trying to take somebody's truth and then our truth and merge something together to find a higher truth. That's the way I look at it. It's like that's what life is just trying to find the higher truth for everybody.
Yeah, I think the only thing that should be like common is respect. Just respect each other.
Yeah.
Doesn't you gotta even respect your enemies. Like honestly, everybody needs to be treated with respect. Everyone needs to have an opportunity to speak up. Because you can't find solutions if you can't understand the problem. So that's why I always try to talk to people who are very different from me. I've talked to several people who have, I don't know why this happens a lot. Like if I go to a bar alone sometimes, people will just tell me their entire life stories. Just and I've heard stories about cheating, like horrible things. And I always just try to understand, okay, so like what made you do that and blah blah blah. And like, and I've had like friends who have cheated, like really close friends. But I still like try to seek the understanding of the situation. Though sometimes I did have to say, hey, like you suck. Like, because that's also being a good friend, if they're
Yeah.
screwing up, especially when it becomes a pattern. But I don't know. I think we gotta respect each other, and we have to accept that two things can be true at the same time. Like your version, that version, and then there's what actually happened. What actually happened, we're never gonna know. So
It's true.
just it's all right. Like that's just life. It's like confusing, and even with language, which I think I talked about in that episode.
Yeah.
Like language is supposed to be a common ground of communication, but people still get super picky about words. And then words mean different things to different people. Like to me, being in love and loving someone is different things, for example. Maybe it's a translation thing from Portuguese. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I just feel that way. And then because this happened to me, like real life story with my ex-boyfriend, the French guy. I think I told him, oh, I think I'm falling in love with you. And then he said, oh, I love you too. And I was like, that's not what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So that's the first time that I noticed that. I was like, oh, okay. I was like, yeah, okay, I guess I love you too. So I said it back, but like I was not trying to say I love you. So yeah, like we got to understand that miscommunication should be like the common ground. It's like we're all misunderstanding each other. So from there, let's try to have a conversation. But
Yeah.
like there's nothing we can do.
I think that's perfect advice, though, right? That in any level, you're right. It's not even just like language between two people who speak different languages. It's the education, or some people are better at using words. Some people don't know how to communicate what they feel. Some people don't know how to communicate in certain ways. So I think, yeah, just trying to understand. I think you're right. Let me ask. You're welcome. So let me ask you. I don't know if you told us already. What future plans? I know you said you're around till August.
Oh
and then
God.
You're going to. I don't know if you told me off air or not. That's why I'm asking. Sorry. I know you were going to Africa.
Well, here's the thing. So I was filming my project, where I visit all the countries I have ancestry from, and I went to all of them, which was multiple in Europe and of course Brazil. And there are two countries in Africa that I also have DNA from that I need to visit, and that has to do a lot with the trade slave that happened in Brazil in the 15s and 1600s. So yeah, it's like deep, deep in my DNA heritage. So I definitely need to visit those two countries. It's Nigeria and Angola this year, and probably a few others if I can in Africa. I still haven't decided which. I know it's a little bit more of a complicated trip because I can't just do it alone. I've already asked for some advice on it. They told me I will be very easy target. So I have to, prepare myself for that. So that's something I definitely want to do this year. If I have the means, I think I'll be able to in terms of time. But I don't know, like I committed to staying in Paris at least until August, September, because I wanted to be here throughout the Olympic Games. I just love being in places with multiple people from all over the world. That's why I chose New York in the first place. It's just going to be a happy time, and it's going to be summer. But after that, it's sort of like whatever the universe brings, there's a chance I'll go to Italy for a little while because I do want to become fluent in Italian, and I already speak some. So that's possible. I might just do a little traveling through Europe and then go to the US for a little bit because I still have a lot of stuff there, and I need to kind of figure that out. So it just depends on what I have time for. What I can say for sure is I will choose a path of growth because that's my thing apparently. But I want to enjoy Europe a little bit. It's the first time I've lived in Europe, and Paris is very central location. It's great for traveling. September, October are still pretty warm. And the best months to travel through Europe are probably September, October, and May, by the way. Less tourists. Yeah, because all the tourists, especially from the US, it's usually the holidays for children and college. So everybody comes between June and August. Just incredibly busy. September, still pretty warm. Many beaches like Italy and Greece, and it'll be way emptier and way cheaper. So probably do some enjoying there. I'm not sure, you know. This is all I got figured out right now. It's like I'm here, it's working, I'm learning the French, like somehow it's happening, you know. So 'cause the other day I was like, oh my God, like I actually speak it. I was like, as I did this like job interview, because I've just been trying new things and I've stopped applying for jobs because I noticed that's not what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna stay independent with my YouTube channel and with my podcast. Like I'm going full time on my content. But I did like the last phase of the job interview a few weeks ago, and it was like 30 minutes speaking French. And I was like, oh my God, I was like, I speak French. I was like, this is happening. So, so yeah, it's official, you know, but she needs to get better. Just every day it's humbling, man. Oh my gosh.
Well, sometimes it's good to be thrown into a fire like that and just see what you have. And then you
Oh, I'm
surprise yourself,
burning.
right? So, we're going to expect, I guess, some more podcast episodes then soon, or
For sure. Yes, I'm going to post one next week. It's already on my calendar. You know, I recorded a podcast episode where I started crying in the middle of it. I don't know if I'm going to post that. But yeah, I get pretty vulnerable. But yeah, the next episodes are going to be interesting. And I have like a couple very interesting topics for the new ones I'm going to be recording. I'll give you a little spoiler because I think they're going to be pretty interesting. And I still have to do a whole episode about all the things that I learned while traveling. I want to do an episode about speaking less and observing more, which we talked about here, about no one can keep promises. Oh, and I don't know how this one would go, but this is kind of where my brain goes. What I hate and love about myself.
Ooh,
Just
that's
an
a tough one.
Isn't that crazy? Damn, where did this idea come from?
I think that would be interesting though, as far as someone who knows you really well, what they think of that, like their reaction to that. Because sometimes the way you see yourself, like the things you don't like about yourself, you find out people like about you, and you're like, what? You know, like,
You know, that's a great idea. Have like a participation from someone that knows me really well.
yeah, I think that would be interesting. Because sometimes people will tell you, like, well, you come off, you know, this way or that way. Or like, well, you're pretty confident or whatever. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, I'm thinking about everything 10 fucking different ways to how I'm going to mess this up. But I think it's kind of freeing too, like to be like, oh, okay, maybe I don't know if they're right, but I'm probably wrong too about myself.
Huh. Yeah, that's a really, really great idea. I always find it funny when people say I give a peaceful energy. I'm like,
Yeah,
really?
I get that too.
That's chaos.
I get that. I get that sometimes too. But
yeah, you look pretty chill to me, so
I-
you're a great actor.
yeah, well, so no, yeah, well, so I don't operate well in like I'm good in a job situation too because I tend to try to bring like everything down. I just don't work well with that kind of stress. Like I will shut down more than I'll get things done. Just the way it's always been my whole life. But like I don't like to be shut down and like not doing anything either. So the only way I can combat that is to kind of keep the levels, turn the noise down a little bit.
It's interesting. I work really well under pressure. It's kind of the opposite.
No, I work well under pressure. What I don't work well is under like a frantic, like if everyone's flipping out around me, I need to take it down, then I can move forward. It actually helps me, like if I can get them all down, we can just focus then. So I'm okay under pressure, but I'm not good with like people screaming and like, you know, stuff like that.
So what's like your best and worst quality?
So I'm like, personally, I think I'm like, what I give off is a very chill quality, and I do kind of balance things out, but I'm like a study in duality. I don't mean that in a bad way either. Like I'm not like two-faced. What I am is, I'm chronically overthinking on one end, but thinking about a situation the way I do is also one of my core strengths, like just seeing it from all different angles. But on a negative sense, I can be very Like nothing gets done because I'm just thinking about it. Or, see, I think there's a good and bad quality. I'm very, very, it's always been a problem for me. I had to kind of learn to balance it. I'm chronically like a people pleaser. Like I'm always concerned with other people's emotions, but like, which I think is a good quality. I think it's good that I could see I can do that. But then like sometimes I'm sacrificing something of myself for that. Like, so it's hard. I don't know. I don't know what I'd say is my best quality. I guess I'm adaptable. That's a good quality I have. Like you can throw me in different situations and I can adapt.
That's like the core essence of a people pleaser. Give me something else.
Oh man, that's true.
I did a whole episode about being a people pleaser.
I know. I heard
I
that too.
understand you.
I heard that. I listened to that one.
Oh man.
I'm very loyal. Let's put it
There
that
we
way.
go.
I'm a loyal person. But see, sometimes that's a negative. That's part of people pleasing too. Sometimes, like I'm so loyal that like if someone screws me over, I try to see what happened. Like, well, they had a rough situation growing up, and meanwhile, I'm getting screwed over. So I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. I'm nice. Like I'm genuinely a nice person, and I'm genuinely caring about other people. But then
I'm convinced. I get it. I think, the loyalty and the people pleasing can definitely get mixed together. It's just about setting better boundaries,
Something I had to learn. Yeah, I had to learn that a lot of times too, like you think you're going to let somebody down. It's more thinking about disappointing someone else than when it actually happens, right? Like, so when it actually happens, you're like, that wasn't bad at all. Like even when I've like quit jobs, I'm like for a whole weekend, I'm like, I'm going to throw up when I have to do this. I'm going to do that. And then it's like, oh, well, I hope it's good. And I hope this and that. And then I'm like, hey, I was important here. You should be upset. But stuff like that. But
well, you seem like a lovely person.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you do as well, even though I think I heard you say you were you get in people's business too much once on your show or something.
It's possible. I don't know.
No, I think you asked the right question. But I've enjoyed speaking with you immensely. So, and I was really looking forward to this. So I'm glad we got it together.
Me too. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I wish you all the success in your podcast. I hope that everybody keeps listening, and if they follow you, if they haven't, just appreciate your time. And if anybody wants to find me, Carolina Risotto with 2 Z's and 2 T's. Otherwise, it's like the food, as delicious as it is. I'm on all platforms, and podcast is No Ducks Given Podcast.
Yes, definitely check it out. Well, I thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for taking some time out of your day today and listening to the show. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to learn more about the topics discussed in this episode, check out our show notes at my website, jburkshow.podbean.com. And don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, or wherever you enjoy your favorite podcast so you never miss out. You can also follow us at JBurk Show on Twitter and Instagram, and JBurk17 on TikTok for the latest updates and going-ons behind the scenes. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review. It helps us improve and grow the show, and each and every one of you has such an impact on that, and I can't thank you enough. Join us next time, and remember,
it won't always be a straight line, but take the journey and escape a while for thoughtful excursions into the world of ideas across media, politics, technology, pop culture, and all realms of civic life.
You're listening to the With Jay Burke Show.